By now, you might be depressed about how far we've strayed from the biblically based government of our past. Of course, God is sovereign and His plan will prevail. We also need to know that there are some practical solutions to the problems which we should work towards. Before we talk about the solutions, we need to answer this question because the answer is important to understand the legality and rightness of some of my proposed solutions. The pertinent question is whether the founders gave us a compact between the states or a consolidated central government. To understand what I'm talking about, I will give you some background. During the Constitutional Convention and during the early periods of our republic, there were two camps of people as to what they wanted the government to be. Some wanted what they called a consolidated government at the national level, meaning something like what we have today, a strong central government with almost no power residing in the states. The leading advocates of a strong central government in the early years were Alexander Hamilton, James Wilson, John Marshall, the Chief Justice who gave us the Marbury versus Madison decision, Joseph Story, and Abraham Lincoln. The other group, who represented the majority opinion in the early years, advocated for what they called a federative system, or a compact between the states, meaning a government made up of a multiple of sovereign states that ceded some power to a national government, but retained all the powers of a sovereign state that were not ceded. Which of these two groups won the argument in the Constitutional Convention and ratifying conventions? The latter, of course. However, despite the clear intent to form a federative system, the other camp consistently tried to impose their vision on America by their actions when given government positions. What do I mean? Take Hamilton, who I've quoted extensively in this class. In the Federalist Papers, he argued rightly about the nature of the Constitution and its limitations on power in order to help it be ratified in the state of New York. However, once he became Secretary of the Treasury under Washington, he changed his tune and convinced Washington to go along with things that were not allowed by the Constitution, using the idea of imputed powers. By imputed, he meant the opposite of what the founders meant by enumerated powers and the 10th Amendment. Hamilton advocated that if a power was not denied to the general government, then it was allowed to the general government. Specifically, he advocated for a national bank and convinced Washington to go along with it. There were also many other areas where he stretched the intent of the Constitution with implied powers. Some call Hamilton the person responsible for the monstrous central government we have today, because he started the slow process of expanding federal power. Joseph Story was also a culprit in his commentaries for this view. Although I have quoted him a lot, he did get one major thing wrong when he advocated that the Constitution created a consolidated government. It's also interesting to note that even though Story did want a strong central government, the word strong is relative. You notice in all the quotes from him, he was what we would call a super conservative, even though he was in the camp of a stronger central government during his era. That just goes to show how more conservative most of the founders were, and how far we have strayed from the original intent of the Constitution. So what did he say that was in error? Story argued that the American people were one people since the colonial period, and that the Continental Congress, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution were all formed by one people, an aggregate of the whole people of America. Therefore, the Constitution was one of a consolidated union of the people of America, giving little strength to the power of the states. I don't have time to go into all his arguments, but the major one was the preamble to the Constitution, which states, "We the people." A contemporary of Story's, a lawyer and judge in Virginia and Secretary of State named Abel Upshur, wrote a whole book soundly refuting Story's reasoning on this issue. Again, I don't have the time for an in-depth discussion, but let me just give a few of his arguments against a consolidated government. The Declaration of Independence states that as free and independent states, plural, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. The Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War, also said, His Britannic Majesty acknowledged that said United States, viz., then he lists all the states by name, to be sovereign and independent states. The Articles of Confederation proclaim that, quote, each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. During the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, Gouverneur Morris of Pennsylvania outlined the distinction between a federal and a national supreme government, the former being a mere compact resting on the good faith of the parties, the latter having a complete and compulsive operation. If the Constitution established a federal government, and it did, then the Constitution did not have a compulsive operation. Neither the framers nor the ratifiers believed the Constitution created a consolidated nation, as Story suggested. It was argued in all state ratifying conventions that the opposite was true. The Union was made more perfect, but never consolidated. The states still had all powers not delegated to the general government, as the 10th Amendment to the Constitution clearly illustrates. The most persuasive argument for the aggregate of the people theory is the preamble to the Constitution, which states, "We the people." The styling at that time denotes the sovereign in big letters, just like "We the people" on the written document declares that we the people are the ultimate sovereign. So therefore, the people are sovereign. But in what capacity? The aggregate of the whole or the people of the states? If the people, as represented by the states, are the sovereign actors, why didn't the Constitution start with "we the states"? Well, as it turned out, the original draft of the Constitution did begin "we the states" and then listed all the states of the day. The change to the "we the people" was made by the Committee on Style because they didn't know which states would ratify and didn't want to insult the states by taking for granted that they would. The change was accepted without debate by the delegates. Now, what is the likelihood that the Committee on Style would dramatically alter the nature of the Union without a debate? Not likely. Thus again showing that the compact theory is correct. Judge Upshur was not the only one to refute Story's arguments. St. George Tucker, in his influential 1803 edition of Blackstone's Commentaries, explained that the states retain the legal and constitutional right to resume the sovereign powers that they merely suspended during such times as they continue to delegate them to the United States under the Constitution. Judges Iredell, Patterson, Blair, and Cushing all expressed the same opinions. These are the points from Upshur in the Constitution itself that refute Story's one people argument. In the Constitution, states are apportioned representatives based on their own population, not on the whole population of the United States. No one can be elected representative of a state that is not a resident of that state. Each state is allowed at least one representative, regardless of population, to preserve the true nature of confederation. An amendment can only be ratified by the states. The election of the president is federative because of the Electoral College. No amendment can deprive a state of its 2 senators. The Constitution could only be ratified by the conventions of the states. Upshur concludes that, Quote, "The federal government is the creature of the states. The Constitution of the United States is to be considered as a compact or a confederation between free, independent, and sovereign states, and is to be construed as such in all cases where its language is doubtful." Why is it so important to acknowledge that we have a federative system? Without that knowledge, the national government becomes supreme and tyrannical, as we have seen. The strongest power and authority in our form of government should be the states, not the central government. I will show in the following solutions why this fact is relevant.